What Minnesota government agency has taxing authority, a $1.4 billion budget, 4,400 employees, its officials are not elected, and no one is really sure what it does? The answer is the Metropolitan Council.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Tonight you'll hear views on what should be done with the Metropolitan Council. These days, it's best known for being $1 billion over budget on the Southwest LRT project. Created in 1967 to provide urban planning for the 7-county metropolitan area, it has spread out like an octopus, its arms controlling metro transit, sewage treatment, affordable housing, and maintaining regional parks and trail systems. The Met Council has independent taxing authority. 0.7% of the sales tax in the 7-county metro area goes directly to the council. The council's 17 members are all appointed by the governor. It is a Southwest LRT project that has the legislature and the public calling for reform. But reforms appear once again to be stalled. We reached out to the chair of the Met Council, Charlie Zelle. Through a spokesman, he declined to comment because he said it would involve legislative issues. Tonight, you'll hear from key players in the debate, as well as analysis from our Republican and Democratic analysts. Let's start with Republican analyst and former Minnesota Senate Majority Leader, Amy Koch. Joining us right now is Republican political consultant Amy Koch, former Senate Majority Leader. What about the future of the Met Council? Because everybody, all parties seem, and I mean all Republicans and Democrats, seem pretty upset with this body.
You know, it's the Met Council history has been, I think it started as, listen, we need something for the 7-county metro area that will deal with public facilities, right? So like sewer, water, because small cities were struggling, people were making decisions. One city would make a decision or not upgrade their system, and that flowed into Lake Minnetonka, which affected, lots of different cities, or Lake Harriet, or whatever. So there was there was kind of a need for that. It expanded into transportation. It expanded into light rail. It expanded into housing. The Met Council grew and grew and grew, and it was established with something. There's no one on the Met Council that's elected. They are beholden only to the governor. The governor appoints, and they're really, it's just basically sort of and they even have taxing authority, which I think is a concern to people, right? So this is a unelected body that has taxing authority and has like a lot of taxing authority. And so I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that it's sort of it's grown into a thing that's a little hard, that's become impossible to control.
Is it too big to kill? I mean, there are proposals for elected members, some joint elections with elected officials, and also community members. But that doesn't seem to be decided.
Right. No, the problem is, what is the solution? Is it too big to kill is a great question. I don't think it's too big to kill, but it is incredibly complicated to unwind. And it will take some real political will, and it's going to take a bipartisan approach, right? Because these counties, the 7-county metro area isn't necessarily certainly not all Hennepin. It's not all DFL. It's also Republican. There's going to be a lot of concerns from cities, mayors, like the list goes on and on and on, and a lot of voices in this. So it will be a project that I don't envy anyone for taking on, but someone needs to take it on because this has become unmanageable.
In your view, does there have to be some kind of election tie to it? That there has to be for accountability?
I absolutely think so. I think so. I think for accountability, I think for how are they a taxing authority without an elected component to them? That just blows my mind. And so I think that's the first piece of it. And what that looks like, I don't know if we vote for the members. I'm not sure, but that's the absolute, I think, the first piece of it. And by the way, stop any growth. No more powers to them. No more duties to them. There's also there's money that's provided to the Met Council on a lot of different levels. And I think that each piece of that needs to be examined.
Amy Koch, thank you so much.
Thank you, Esme.
Up next, Democratic analyst Abou Amara and longtime Met Council critic Mary Pattock. Joining us right now, Democratic analyst Abou Amara. Abou, the Met Council seems to have been one problem after another, one headline after another, all negative, and yet nothing seems to happen. What do you think is going on here?
Yeah, well, what you've got is you've got frustration with the public, but you've got an entrenched organization in private. And so when those two things go to the Capitol, it tends to cause some conflict. And so ultimately, you can put together a committee, you can have folks say, you know what, we should fix it, but ultimately it doesn't get solved. And so it looks like this is going to be kicked out for another year.
Right, and that's exactly, I interviewed Senator Dibble, and he said exactly that. If you go down the street and ask if the member should be elected, everybody will say yes, but then you get to the Capitol and there are all these ponderous things that can be done. Nobody's paid a price though for the incompetence that's over there. I mean, does that have to happen before change comes?
Well, Senator Dibble alluded to this in some conversations that ultimately he said folks are going to have to go to the people and build a political kind of demand that change happen at the Capitol. And so I think you're going to see this not just become kind of an inside the Capitol issue or kind of a community issue. It's going to have to become a political issue if you want to get some real change, because right now they just don't have the votes inside of the Capitol. There are lots of interests that are benefiting from the status quo. And that's something that's going to continue to frustrate the public.
They're obviously barreling along and heading for more light rail projects. Is there any kind of study or introspection at all about the future of light rail in general at a time when more and more people are working partially from home? I mean, there's a question of, well, is the ridership still there?
Yeah, the ridership's an important question. And the management's an important question. And I think what you saw with Senator Dibble and Representative Ornstein is saying, look, if we're not going to change this to be an elected organization, at least let's narrow the mandate of the Met Council so it's really doing the fundamental things that it was supposed to do and not be in the space of light rail or bus rapid transit or other those big ticket items. And they're asking for those things to be handed off to MnDOT or the State Department of Transportation.
Do you think that that's a possible solution, that it's just kind of grown like a fungus over a lawn, just keeps spreading?
Well, I think the growth has been well intentioned at the Met Council. I think it serves a critical and important function, but I do think it's true. It's doing things now that maybe it wasn't anticipated to do 30 years ago. The issue is staffing. That's the biggest issue at the State Department of Transportation. You've got the Blatnick Bridge that's coming up that's going to take a lot of energy from the State Department of Transportation.
That's the big bridge that President Biden came here for, that's going to connect Duluth to Superior. That's a big project.
Big project, going to take a lot of energy from the State Department of Transportation. And remember, MnDOT plays a really important role in greater Minnesota in making sure that roads and bridges are taken care of. If MnDOT's going to take on more role in the metro, it's really going to cause some issues there with the State Department of Transportation. It's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If we want to move it to MnDOT, we've got to give MnDOT the resources to do it, and they just don't have them right now.
A very complicated situation. Abou Amara, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, joining us right now is Mary Pattock. She has been a citizen activist on this issue with the Southwest LRT going back more than 20 years. Isn't that right, Mary?
Oh, well, in my case, probably about 11 years, actually.
Or 11 years, okay. Well, and you've been very active, and you actually served on this committee that was evaluating the Met Council and what to do with the Met Council in the future. What came out of this big advisory council?
Well, so far, as far as I can tell, a big nothing, which is very disappointing because, some people fault the task force for not having come through with the solution.
Right.
I don't think that's quite our job. Our job, I think, was to frame it and make recommendations. And we did that. We basically gave the legislature three things. We gave them a diagnosis. We said, here's the problem. The name of the problem is accountability, that there is disagreement and confusion about who the Met Council is accountable to. So that's the name of the problem. That was not easy to arrive at, but it got 100% consensus on that issue. Number two, we gave them a list of about 10 guidelines to follow in fixing the Met Council. And number three, we gave them I think about 6 different possible models that they could look at. Esme, there are probably 100 different ways to configure a system of government like this, and it's
These-
the
These
legislature.
recommendations went to the legislature.
They went to the legislature.
Okay. It's not clear anything's going to happen at the legislature, though.
No, as far as I know, there are 2 pieces of legislation. One, which is sponsored by Senator Dibble, would put construction of the Met Council, or I'm sorry, would put construction of light rail in the hands of MnDOT, the Department of Transportation. And the other piece of legislation that is out of from Senator Howe would stop construction of the blue line until the green line is finished. He says, focus on this and get that done, and let's not have any more mistakes until you've finished this job.
And you have been so active in the Southwest LRT. The mistakes keep happening. Does that surprise you? The latest is that the tracks were laid too close together.
I mean, they don't seem to be able to use a yardstick, a tape measure. So
and it's serious. You've got two.
It's serious because in this, I mean, people say they're only a foot off. This is about how close 2 trains of different kinds, and one is carrying ethanol, which is explosive, and the other has electric wires over it. How close can they come and be safe? And there are standards that guide this, and they have violated the standards.
Right.
So the standards are, I believe, 24 feet, and they're closer than that. It's already close. It's already dangerous. And they seem to brush it off. And Jim Alexander said, well, this isn't a very big deal. It is a big deal.
Just quickly, because we're running out of time, what do you think do you think that they should be elected?
If I were in charge, I would put together a group that included directly elected officials, representatives of the counties and the cities, some representation by the governor, because the governor needs to be involved. So
Okay.
I think it needs to come together on all those levels.
Okay. Mary Pattock, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Esme.
Up next, 2 powerful Minnesota state senators, each of whom served on a Met Council government task force, Senators Scott Dibble and Eric Pratt. Well, joining us right now is Senator Scott Dibble. He is the chair of the Minnesota Senate Transportation Committee. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Esme.
Okay. The Met Council, what to do with it? You have proposed having people who are on the Met Council elected.
Right.
Seems like common sense, but that proposal doesn't seem to go anywhere.
Well, it does have a tremendous amount of public support.
Yes.
You go up, the street that I live on is right there. If I were to walk out to the street and talk to anyone walking down the sidewalk and ask if there was a unit of government that provided literally billions of dollars in services every year, the kinds of services that we touch and feel every day, owns billions of dollars in capital assets and infrastructure, is responsible for keeping up that infrastructure and making sure it's in good repair and the service is delivered effectively. And when there was a service failure or a gap, would it make sense to have no one to call to say, hey, I wish you would do this differently, or you wish you would do better? They would say, no, that makes no sense.
Right. One of the proposals that you have up at the legislature right now is moving the construction projects to MnDOT. Senator Pratt, a Republican, says he's all in favor of that. Explain what that is, and are there any chances of it getting through?
So part of what happens when an agency has no level of accountability is it just kind of does its own thing, and is impervious to criticism or good ideas, and it really creates a culture and an atmosphere where things are just simply not done optimally. That is really my diagnosis of what has gone wrong with this gigantic project, Southwest Light Rail Transit. They simply mismanaged, and we have multiple investigations from the legislative auditor that tell us very specifically how they've mismanaged this project. They didn't let a full project. The FTA was concerned about how much it would cost. They didn't have enough money in hand. They weren't fully transparent with their decision making. When things started going awry and the contractor was claiming additional expense or delays in the schedule, they would simply accommodate the contractor, and the contractor, is there to make as much money as they possibly can. So they clearly can't manage this giant construction project. We have an agency that does these things very, very well, and that's the Department of Transportation. So if we're not going to be able to reform the Met Council in terms of its level of transparency and its level of accountability, at least we could maybe take one of its major responsibilities and transfer it to an agency that is more transparent, more accountable, and really good at building large public works projects, the Department of Transportation.
As I understand it, the Met Council originated to be a planning organization for the metro area in terms of the infrastructure, handling a lot of federal dollars, that kind of thing. Couldn't that just, as like your proposal, couldn't that be duplicated in other agencies?
It could. I actually really like that the Met Council both plans our transit system, our transportation system, in conjunction with planning, and coordinating things like land use and sewer service and those sorts of things. Really make sure that planning isn't simply a salon conversation, creating documents that sit on the shelf, but the planning for those infrastructure investments, those quality of life, economic enhancement sorts of investments, then go hand in glove with the actual implementation, the delivery of the services that follow from that. However, it does break down a little bit when we talk about this accountability, transparency, responsiveness piece, because there's simply a lack of connection to people who are elected, who are really, really looking out for the public good and the public's interests. So yes, they could be sent out to other agencies, but if we could fix this reform piece, that would be the ideal.
All right. Well, Senator Scott Dibble, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much, Esme.
Well, joining us right now is Republican Senator Eric Pratt. Senator Pratt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. I know you have strong feelings about the future of the Met Council and the Met Council. You've spent a lot of work and time on this. Where are you right now on this issue?
Well, Esme, you're right. We spent all summer looking at this issue and most of the fall, and I think we're at a deadlock right now. There are really two different options. One is an option where we directly elect our Met Council members, and the other, which I prefer, is one that we call a Council of Governments, where our local cities and counties get to choose who represents them on the Met Council.
Either way, that would have both of those would have people's involvement, the citizens' involvement that a lot of people are calling for. Senator Dibble is proposing transferring some of their projects to MnDOT because MnDOT can do a better job. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm actually a co-author on that bill, and I do support it. I think we've seen that Met Council is not good at managing these large transportation projects. MnDOT has a track record of success, and we should be moving these projects over. This is what the Southwest Light Rail is way over budget, and we need to do better.
I think the public is kind of going, what is going on? Problem after problem, billions of dollars. I mean, it just seems like there's no end in sight to this problematic governance over there.
It is a problem, and part of it is a lack of accountability, and that's something we talked about in the Met Council task force. Was we don't know who the Met Council is accountable to. It's certainly not accountable to the citizens that it represents. It's not accountable to the taxpayer. It seems to be only accountable to the governor, and even he has said at times that he's mildly interested in it.
Well, it's a lot of people are very interested in it. Can you explain what you would like to see that governance council and how that would work?
Sure. Well, right now, a Met Council rep has a district that's about the size of 2.5 state Senate districts, and I think that's too large. So my proposal would basically create 33 municipal districts. It would give every county a seat at the table, and they would get to choose who represents them on the Met Council. So they have a direct voice, and whoever's on the Met Council is directly accountable back to the people who appoint them.
Do we need a Met Council? I mean, couldn't, taking on your bill, moving the construction projects, I mean, couldn't their duties be reallocated to these state agencies that ultimately are accountable to the people through elections and voting?
That's a really good question. And a lot of what we have in the Met Council could be reassessed. We do need a metropolitan planning organization to manage large federally funded projects. That's a requirement from the federal government.
Okay.
But for instance, we have a Met Council that has responsibilities that are broader than any other MPOA in the country. You know, should they be involved in housing? Should they be involved in land use? One thing I hear they do very well is wastewater treatment, and that's something I think we should continue to look at keeping as a coordinated function. But many of the functions should be farmed out to other agencies. They're duplicative.
What are the odds of this bill of yours and Senator Dibble's passing this legislative session?
I don't think it's very good that we're going to see any action this year. One thing that we did see was very much a split in the task force. I would say that we had a few members that were open to directly electing a Met Council move more towards the Council of Governments as they started seeing some of the issues and concerns that could arise from direct election.
Okay. All right. Well, Senator Pratt, thank you so much for your input. We really appreciate it. And I know you put a lot of time into that committee and all those hearings.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We reached out to Governor Tim Walz, and his office gave us this statement. The governor is open to considering changes to the Met Council governance structure, including electing members. He's supportive of finding ways to increase efficiency and accountability, but has concerns about MnDOT's capacity to take over the Met Council's construction projects. That does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me at esme@wcco.com with comments and suggestions. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Fridays, it posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.